Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the new Spider-Man after Peter Parker retired. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The autumn wind cut through the concrete canyons of New York City like a blade, carrying with it the acrid smell of smoke and the distant sound of sirens. Atop the Chrysler Building, a figure in red and blue watched the sun sink behind the Manhattan skyline, painting the city in shades of amber and crimson. Peter Parker, the amazing Spider-Man, flexed his fingers inside his torn gloves, feeling the familiar ache that had become his constant companion over the past few years. At 45, Peter had been Spider-Man for nearly 3 decades. 3 decades of protecting New York, of saving lives, of sacrificing everything for the greater good. His body bore the map of those years, scars crisscrossing his chest like a subway map, old fractures that ached when it rained, and a persistent pain in his lower back that no amount of stretching could quite eliminate. But tonight wasn't about his pain. Tonight, New York needed Spider-Man one more time. His phone buzzed against his hip. Peter pulled it out, squinting at the screen through his mask's lenses. The caller ID read MJ. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, beautiful," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that contrasted with the tension in his shoulders. "Peter Benjamin Parker," Mary Jane's voice came through, a mixture of concern and exasperation that only 20 years of marriage could perfect. "You promised me you were just going out for reconnaissance. The news is saying there's some kind of major villain gathering in Times Square. Would you believe me if I said I'm actually at the bodega getting milk?" "Peter," he sighed, looking down at the city below. "They're all here, MJ. Scorpion, Rhino, Vulture, Mysterio, and Norman." There was a pause on the other end. Norman Osborn, or rather, the latest person to take up the Green Goblin mantle after Norman and Harry's deaths, had been particularly vicious in recent months. This new Goblin, whoever was behind the mask, seemed to have a personal vendetta that went beyond the usual villain motivations. "I'm calling the Avengers," MJ said firmly. "They're dealing with an invasion in Tokyo. Some kind of international hero summit was attacked. It's all over the news." Peter stood up, his joints protesting. "Besides, this is personal. They're calling me out specifically. If I don't show, they'll hurt innocent people," MJ finished for him. It was an old song, one they danced to too many times. "Just come back to me, okay? Annie's coming home from college this weekend. She wants to see her dad." "I promise," Peter said, meaning it with every fiber of his being, even as he knew how many times he'd made that same promise. "I love you. I love you too, Spider." The line went dead, and Peter tucked the phone away. He rolled his shoulders, bouncing on the balls of his feet to loosen up. His spider sense had been tingling all day, a low-level buzz that had escalated to a full symphony of danger. Whatever was waiting for him down there, it was going to be bad. He shot a web line and swung into the growing darkness. Meanwhile, in a hotel conference room 16 blocks away, Izuku Midoriya sat at a large oval table, trying his best to pay attention to the presentation on international hero cooperation protocols. At 32, Deku had achieved his dream of becoming the #1 hero in Japan, inheriting not just All Might's power but his position as the symbol of peace. Yet sitting in this sterile conference room, listening to bureaucrats discuss jurisdiction and liability issues, he couldn't help but feel restless. "The proposal for shared intelligence between agencies is sound," the presenter droned on, "but we need to consider the privacy laws of individual nations." An explosion rocked the building. Instantly, Deku was on his feet, one for all crackling through his body like green lightning. The other heroes in the room, representatives from various nations, were also rising, ready for action. "That came from Times Square," said Captain Celebrity, the American hero who'd been hosting the summit. "But that's impossible. We have heroes stationed." Another explosion, closer this time. The windows of the conference room rattled. "Everyone, evacuate the civilians in the building," Deku commanded, his voice carrying the authority of years of experience. "I'll go ahead and assess the situation." "Midoriya, wait," someone called out, but Deku was already moving, full cowling at 20% carrying him through the window in a shower of glass. The New York City air hit him like a wall. It was different from Tokyo, denser somehow, carrying the weight of history and countless battles. As he bounded from building to building, using air force to propel himself forward, he could see the chaos unfolding in Times Square. 5 villains, no 6, were wreaking havoc. Deku didn't recognize them, but their costumes and abilities marked them as serious threats. A massive man in a rhinoceros-themed armor charged through police barriers. A figure with massive wings dove at fleeing civilians. But what caught Deku's attention was the lone figure in red and blue, moving between them all with a grace that seemed impossible. Spider-Man. Deku had studied international heroes extensively, and Spider-Man was a legend. For decades he'd protected New York with a combination of incredible powers and indomitable will. Watching him now, Deku could see why. Despite being obviously outnumbered, Spider-Man moved like water, flowing between attacks, using his webs to create barriers, to pull civilians to safety, to bind villains even as he dodged their assaults. But Deku's trained eye caught what others might miss. The slight delay in Spider-Man's dodges, the way he favored his left side, the labored breathing between quips. This wasn't a hero in his prime. This was a warrior at the end of a very long war. Deku landed on a building overlooking the square, ready to jump in, when Spider-Man's voice rang out, amplified by some hidden speaker in his suit. Okay, guys, I know we've done this dance before, but usually you have the courtesy to attack me one at a time. What happened to villain etiquette? Did you all miss the same evil finishing school? The Green Goblin, hovering on his glider above the chaos, laughed, a sound that sent chills down Deku's spine. Oh, Spider-Man. Still making jokes. Tell me, do you think you'll still be laughing when we're done with you? Probably not, Spider-Man admitted, dodging a blast from Scorpion's tail. But my therapist says humor is a valid coping mechanism, so who's really winning here? The Goblin raised his hand, and Deku saw something glinting in it, a pumpkin bomb, but different somehow, glowing with an unnatural purple light. This ends tonight, Spider-Man. Your last web has been spun. Deku moved before he could think, full cowling at 45% launching him into the battle. He intercepted the bomb with a Delaware Smash Air Force, sending it spiraling into the sky where it exploded harmlessly. Well, mostly harmlessly. The shockwave shattered windows for 3 blocks. What? The Goblin spun on his glider, facing the newcomer. Who dares? I am Deku, Izuku announced, landing in a crouch beside Spider-Man. The symbol of peace from Japan. And I'm here to help. Spider-Man tilted his head, those iconic white lenses focusing on Deku. Huh. When did backup become actual literal symbols? No offense, but that's a lot of pressure for a job title. Despite the situation, Deku found himself smiling. Says the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Touché. Spider-Man shot a web at Rhino, yanking himself out of the way of a charge. I don't suppose your symbol powers include dealing with 6 supervillains who apparently scheduled their grudge match during my joint pain flare-up? I've got your back, Deku assured him, noting the way Spider-Man had unconsciously rubbed his lower back after that last maneuver. Great. I call the flying psychopath. You can have, literally anyone else. The battle erupted in earnest then. Deku found himself facing off against Scorpion and Rhino while Spider-Man engaged the Goblin in an aerial dance of webs and pumpkin bombs. The other villains, Vulture, Mysterio, and someone in what looked like an upgraded Shocker suit, spread out, causing chaos and forcing both heroes to constantly divide their attention. Deku had fought many villains in his career, but there was something different about these foes. They weren't just powerful, they were experienced, coordinated. They'd fought Spider-Man before, knew his moves, his weaknesses. When Spider-Man webbed Vulture's wings, Mysterio was already there with an illusion to disorient him. When Deku managed to knock Rhino off balance, Scorpion was ready with a tail strike that forced him to abandon his follow-up attack. They're working together too well, Deku called out, using Black Whip to pull a cluster of civilians to safety. This is planned. Yeah, Wednesday is apparently Kill Spider-Man Day on everyone's calendar, Spider-Man replied, but Deku could hear the strain in his voice. Did not get that memo. The Goblin laughed again, diving low on his glider. Oh, we've been planning this for months, Spider-Man. Every move you make, we've anticipated. Every web you shoot, we've counted. You're old, slow, and tonight you're finished. Spider-Man's response was to web the Goblin's glider, yanking it off course and sending the villain spinning. Old? I prefer vintage. Like a fine wine or a classic car that desperately needs new shocks. But even as he quipped, Deku saw Spider-Man stumble. His spider sense, that legendary danger warning ability, must have been going haywire with threats from every direction. And that's when Deku noticed it. The villains weren't trying to defeat Spider-Man quickly. They were wearing him down, making him work for every save, every dodge, every attack. They're trying to exhaust you, Deku realized, landing beside Spider-Man after dispersing a group of Mysterio's illusions with a controlled Detroit smash. Yeah, well, it's working, Spider-Man admitted, his chest heaving. But as long as there are people to save, then we save them together, Deku finished. You focus on the goblin. I'll handle crowd control and the others. Spider-Man looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since Deku had arrived. You sure about this, kid? These aren't your average villains. Deku smiled, one for all flowing through him at 50% now, green energy crackling around his body like an aurora. I'm sure. Besides, someone once told me that heroes help each other, no matter where they're from. Smart person, Spider-Man said, then shot a web and launched himself at the goblin. Okay, Norman wannabe. Let's dance. Fair warning though, I learned all my moves from YouTube tutorials. What followed was perhaps one of the most intense battles Deku had ever participated in. He pushed one for all harder than he had in years, juggling multiple villains while trying to minimize collateral damage and protect civilians. Scorpion's tail strikes were powerful enough to crack concrete, Rhino's charges could demolish buildings, and Mysterio's illusions made it hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. But Deku was the symbol of peace, trained by All Might, tempered by countless battles. He flowed between fighting styles, using shoot style against Rhino's ground-based attacks, Air Force to counter Vulture's aerial advantage, and Black Whip to restrain Scorpion when the villain got too close to a group of trapped tourists. Still, it was Spider-Man who drew his attention. The veteran hero was giving everything he had against the Green Goblin, and it was magnificent to watch. Every movement was economical, decades of experience distilled into pure efficiency. He used his webs not just as weapons but as tools, creating shields, setting traps, even using them to redirect the goblin's bombs back at him. But he was slowing down. Deku could see it in the way Spider-Man's dodges were becoming narrower, how his web shots were slightly off target. The goblin saw it too. Getting tired, Spider-Man? The villain taunted, producing another of those strange purple bombs. This one's special. Made it just for you. All those years of studying your blood samples from our battles finally paid off. Spider-Man's lenses widened, the only sign of his concern. You know, most people just collect stamps. The goblin threw the bomb. Spider-Man moved to dodge, but Rhino, breaking away from Deku for just a moment, clipped him with a horn. It wasn't a direct hit, but it was enough to throw off Spider-Man's timing. Time seemed to slow. Deku saw the bomb approaching Spider-Man, saw the hero trying to recover his balance, saw the resignation in his body language as he realized he wouldn't make it in time. But instead of trying to save himself, Spider-Man shot his webs at a nearby building, pulling himself not away from the bomb but toward a school bus full of children that had been abandoned in the case. He was going to use his body to shield them from the blast. No! Deku moved at 100% of one for all, the power threatening to tear his body apart. He reached Spider-Man just as the bomb detonated, wrapping them both in Black Whip and channeling every bit of power he could into a defensive shield. The explosion was unlike anything Deku had experienced. It wasn't just destructive force. It was something else, something that seemed to eat at his energy, drain his strength. Through the purple flames he heard Spider-Man scream, a sound that would haunt him for years to come. When the smoke cleared, both heroes were on the ground. Deku's costume was in tatters, his body covered in burns despite his defensive measures. But Spider-Man was convulsing, his body jerking uncontrollably as purple energy coursed over his suit. What did you do? Deku demanded, forcing himself to his feet despite the pain. The goblin landed nearby, his mask reflecting the fires burning around Times Square. I gave him what he always wanted, a chance to be normal. That bomb was designed specifically for Spider-Man's unique physiology. It's destroying the radioactive spider enzymes in his blood, burning out his powers from the inside. In a few minutes, He'll be just another middle-aged man with bad joints and worse jokes. You're killing him. No, the goblin said, and Deku could hear the smile in his voice. I'm doing something much worse. I'm making him human. He'll live, but he'll never be Spider-Man again. He'll have to watch from the sidelines as his city burns, knowing he can't do anything to stop it. Spider-Man's convulsions were getting worse. Deku knelt beside him, trying to help, but he didn't know what to do. This was beyond his experience, beyond his power to fix. Hey, Spider-Man gasped, his voice barely audible through his mask. Simple kid. Don't talk, Deku said. Save your strength. The bus, Spider-Man managed. The kids, Deku looked. The school bus was intact, the children inside scared but unharmed. Spider-Man's positioning had ensured they were shielded from the worst of the blast. They're safe, Deku assured him. You saved them. Good, Spider-Man said, then his body seized again, back arching in pain. The other villains were regrouping, preparing for another assault. Deku was injured, one for all flickering unstably through his damaged body. Spider-Man was down, possibly dying, and there were still so many civilians in danger. That's when the cavalry arrived. The remaining heroes from the International Summit descended on Times Square like an avenging army. Captain Celebrity slammed into Rhino with the force of a meteor. Hawks from Japan, who'd been visiting for the summit, engaged Vulture in an aerial duel. Best Jeanist began restraining villains with his fibers while Kamui Woods evacuated civilians. We've got this, Captain Celebrity told Deku. Get Spider-Man to safety. Deku didn't need to be told twice. He gathered Spider-Man in his arms, the hero frighteningly light, and bounded away from the battlefield. Behind him, he heard the goblins scream of rage as the villains were overwhelmed by the arriving heroes. Where's the nearest hospital? Deku asked desperately. No, Spider-Man said weakly. Stark Tower. Medical Bay knows my physiology. Deku changed direction, following Spider-Man's weak directions. As they moved through the city, he felt Spider-Man's body continue to deteriorate. Whatever that bomb had done, it was thorough. By the time they reached Stark Tower, Spider-Man had stopped convulsing, but his breathing was shallow, labored. The tower's AI, Friday, immediately recognized Spider-Man and opened emergency protocols. Medical robots swarmed them as Deku laid Spider-Man on a gurney that materialized from the wall. Wait, Spider-Man said, reaching up to his mask. With trembling fingers, he pulled it off, revealing the face of Peter Parker, older, lined with years of stress and battle, but still carrying a fundamental kindness in his brown eyes. Thank you for having my back out there. Any hero would have done the same, Deku said. Peter smiled weakly. No. Not anyone. You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone I used to be. His eyes started to close. The city, it's going to need. He passed out before he could finish, and the medical robots whisked him away into the depths of the tower's medical facilities. Deku stood there, alone in the sterile white room, covered in burns and bruises, watching as one of Earth's greatest heroes was taken away, possibly to never swing again. He thought about Peter's unfinished sentence. The city was going to need, what? A new protector? A new Spider-Man? Outside, sirens continued to wail, and Deku could hear the distant sounds of the battle winding down. The villains would be captured, the immediate threat ended. But something fundamental had changed tonight. He'd watched a legend fall, seen the end of an era written in purple fire and pain. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Hawks, villains contained. Goblin escaped. Spider-Man? Deku typed back, alive. Condition unknown. He sat down heavily in a chair that adjusted automatically to his weight, his body finally registering the extent of his own injuries. As medical robots emerged to tend to him as well, Deku couldn't shake the image of Spider-Man pulling off his mask, the weight of years visible in every line of his face. Friday, he said to the AI. Will Spider-Man be okay? There was a pause before the AI responded in a measured, artificial tone. Mr. Parker's condition is critical but stable. However, preliminary scans indicate complete destruction of the radioactive markers that gave him his abilities. The probability of power restoration is negligible. Deku closed his eyes. Spider-Man, Peter Parker, had given everything to protect his city. And now, after decades of service, he'd been forced into retirement in the cruelest way possible. Not by choice, not by age, but by an enemy who knew that taking away his ability to help others would be the worst torture imaginable. Is there anything I can do? Deku asked. Mr. Parker has been asking for you, Friday said. Once your injuries are treated, he would like to speak with you. Deku nodded, wincing as a medical robot began cleaning his burns. Whatever Peter wanted to tell him, whatever came next, Deku would be there. It was what heroes did for each other. As the New York night deepened outside the tower's windows, Deku thought about the weight of legacy, the price of heroism, and the webs that connected all those who chose to stand between the darkness and the light. Tonight, one of those vital strands had been cut. But perhaps, Deku thought as he remembered the determination in Peter's eyes even as his powers failed him, perhaps new webs could be spun. Perhaps the spider's legacy didn't have to end here. The medical robots continued their work, and somewhere deeper in the tower, Peter Parker began the long, painful journey toward a future without the abilities that had defined him for so long. And Izuku Midoriya, the symbol of peace from across the Pacific, sat in quiet vigil, understanding that he had witnessed not just the end of a battle, but the end of an era. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, and perhaps new possibilities. But tonight was for honoring the fall of a hero who had given everything and asked for nothing in return. The last web had indeed been spun. But in the darkness of that medical bay, in the silence between two heroes from different worlds, the first threads of something new were already beginning to form. The steady beep of medical monitors filled the private room in Stark Tower's medical wing. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting golden rectangles across the stark white floor. It had been 3 days since the battle in Times Square, 3 days since Spider-Man had fallen, and Izuku Midoriya had barely left the tower. He sat in an ergonomic chair beside Peter Parker's bed, absently flexing his bandaged hands. His own injuries were healing well. Accelerated recovery was one of the benefits of One for All. But the emotional weight of what he'd witnessed still pressed heavily on his shoulders. Peter had been conscious intermittently over the past 72 hours. But this was the first time he'd seemed truly lucid. His brown eyes, no longer hidden behind the iconic mask, tracked Deku's movement as the younger hero stood to pour water from a pitcher on the bedside table. You know, Peter said, his voice hoarse but carrying a hint of his characteristic humor, most people send flowers when someone's in the hospital. Not that I'm complaining about the company, but don't you have a country to protect or something? Deku smiled, handing Peter the water glass and helping him sit up enough to drink. Hawks and the others are covering for me. Besides, All Might always taught me that a hero's job isn't done until everyone is safe, including other heroes. Peter took a careful sip, wincing slightly. The doctors had been clear. Physically, he would recover. The burns would heal, the fractures would mend. But his powers, the abilities that had made him Spider-Man for nearly 3 decades, were gone. Complete cellular destruction of the radioactive spider enzymes, they'd said. Irreversible. All Might, Peter mused, setting down the glass. I met him once, you know. About 10 years ago. International crisis thing. He was impressive. He spoke highly of you too, Deku said, returning to his chair. He said Spider-Man understood something that many heroes forget, that the small saves matter just as much as the big ones. Friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Peter said with a rueful smile. Though I guess I'll have to drop the Spider-Man part now. Just friendly neighborhood Peter. Doesn't have the same ring to it. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Over the past 3 days, Deku had watched Peter cycle through various stages of grief about his lost powers. Denial had come first, insisting the doctors were wrong, that his healing factor would kick in. Then anger, though Peter had directed it entirely at himself rather than others. Bargaining had been heartbreaking to witness, Peter asking every visitor if there was anything, technology, magic, even other mutations, that could restore what he'd lost. Now, it seemed, he was approaching acceptance. Or at least resignation. Mr. Parker, Deku began, but Peter held up a hand. Peter. Please. I think we've moved past formalities. You literally carried my broken body across Manhattan while I was having radioactive seizures. That makes us at least on a first-name basis. Peter, Deku corrected himself. I wanted to ask, the Green Goblin. He seemed to know exactly how to hurt you. The bomb was specifically designed to destroy me without killing me, Peter finished. Yeah, that's the Osborn legacy for you. 3 generations of insane genius dedicated to making my life miserable. He paused, staring at his hands. This new one, though. I don't know who's under the mask. Norman and Harry are both dead, have been for years. I thought that nightmare was over. Could it be another relative? Maybe. Probably. The Osborns were nothing if not prolific in their dysfunction. Peter flexed his fingers, and Deku could see him testing for any hint of his lost wall-crawling ability. Nothing. But that's not why I asked you to stay. Deku leaned forward. Over the past 3 days, he'd wondered about this. Peter had been insistent, even in his delirium, that Deku not leave. Friday, the tower's AI, had relayed the message multiple times. Peter reached over to the bedside table, pressing a hidden button. The room's windows immediately tinted, becoming opaque, and Deku felt a subtle hum that suggested some kind of electronic countermeasure had been activated. Privacy shield, Peter explained. What I'm about to tell you, it can't leave this room. Not yet. I understand, Deku said, though he was increasingly curious. Peter took a deep breath. How much do you know about how I became Spider-Man? The general story. You were bitten by a radioactive spider as a teenager. It gave you your powers. Right. Except that's the simplified version. The spider that bit me wasn't just radioactive, it was genetically modified, part of an Oscorp experiment that was decades ahead of its time. The radiation was just the catalyst. The real change was genetic, cellular. The spider's death transferred something into me, rewrote my DNA in ways that scientists are still trying to understand. Peter pulled open a drawer in the bedside table, revealing a tablet. He powered it on, entering a complex password, then handed it to Deku. The screen showed detailed genetic sequences, cellular scans, and data that was far beyond Deku's scientific education. For 30 years, I'd been studying my own mutation, Peter continued. Working with Reed Richards, Tony Stark before he died, Bruce Banner, the brightest minds on the planet. We discovered something remarkable. The spider essence, for lack of a better term, isn't entirely gone. Deku looked up sharply. But the doctors said, the doctors are right. My body can't produce or sustain spider powers anymore. The goblin's bomb saw to that. But, Peter tapped the tablet screen, bringing up a new set of data. The spider essence itself, the core genetic template that created Spider-Man, still exists in trace amounts in my blood. Not enough to give me powers, but enough to potentially transfer to someone else. The weight of what Peter was suggesting hit Deku like a Detroit smash. You want to pass on your powers? I want to ensure Spider-Man continues, Peter corrected. New York needs its protector. Hell, the world needs Spider-Man. Not just for the big threats, but for the small ones. The purse snatchers, the bullies, the everyday criminals who think they can prey on the innocent because no one's watching. But surely there are others. I've considered everyone, Peter interrupted. Miles Morales would be the obvious choice, but he gestured to a frame on the wall, a photo of a younger Spider-Man standing next to another figure in a black and red spider suit. Miles had his time. 5 years ago, he took a villain's attack meant for a group of children. Saved them all, but the nerve damage to his spine meant he had to retire. He can walk, live a normal life, but his days of web-swinging are over. Deku studied the photo, noting the easy camaraderie between the two Spider-Men. There must be other candidates. Other heroes who what? Who can handle the responsibility? The pressure? The constant balance between saving everyone and losing everything? Peter's voice carried decades of exhaustion. Being Spider-Man isn't just about having powers, Izuku. It's about understanding that with great power comes great responsibility. It's about making impossible choices and living with the consequences. It's about getting up every morning knowing that you might lose everyone you love, and suiting up anyway. And you think I understand that? Peter looked at him directly. I watched you during that fight. You didn't know me, had no obligation to help, but you threw yourself into danger without hesitation. When that bomb went off, your first instinct was to shield both me and those kids, even though it meant taking the full force of the blast yourself. And for the past 3 days you've sat here, keeping vigil over a foreign hero you'd never met before this week. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. But more than that, I'd done my research. The symbol of peace, inheritor of All Might's will. You understand legacy, understand the weight of carrying something greater than yourself. You've already proven you can bear that burden. Deku was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing. My power. One for all, it's already a combination of multiple quirks. Adding something like your abilities, we don't even know if it's possible. We don't, Peter agreed. But Tony Stark didn't think a teenager from Queens could be an Avenger either. Sometimes the impossible is just something that hasn't been tried yet. A knock at the door interrupted them. Peter pressed the button again, deactivating the privacy shield, and called out, "Come in." The door opened to reveal a man in his 30s, African American, walking with a subtle but noticeable limp. Deku recognized him immediately from the photo, Miles Morales. "Pete," Miles said, his voice warm but concerned. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a radioactive bomb designed specifically to ruin my life," Peter replied. "So you know Tuesday." Miles shook his head but smiled. He turned to Deku, extending his hand. Miles Morales, former Spider-Man, current high school physics teacher, an occasional provider of reality checks to stubborn mentors who refuse to rest properly. Deku shook his hand, noting the firm grip despite Miles' injury. "Izuka Midoriya. It's an honor to meet you." "The honor's mine," Miles said, pulling up another chair. "I've been following your career. What you've done in Japan, the way you've united heroes and civilians alike, it's impressive." "Miles knows," Peter said quietly. "About what I'm proposing." Miles' expression grew serious. "I do. And for what it's worth, I think Pete's right. When I had to hang up the webs, it nearly killed me. Not physically, but spiritually, knowing that people needed help and I couldn't provide it. Spider-Man isn't just a person. It's an idea, a promise that someone's looking out for the little guy." "But why me?" Deku asked. "Why not an American hero? Someone who knows New York, knows its people?" "Because Spider-Man was never just about New York," Peter said. "Sure, this city was my home, my responsibility. But the idea that anyone, regardless of where they come from or what they look like, can make a difference, that's universal." Miles nodded. "Plus, let's be practical. Most American heroes are either already established in their own identities, or they're too green to handle this legacy. You're in a unique position, experienced enough to handle the power, young enough to carry it forward, and, Deku prompted. "And you're not from here," Miles finished. "You don't have the baggage, the enemies who know your every move. You could be a fresh start, a new chapter." Peter reached under his pillow, pulling out a small device that looked like a modified insulin pen. "This is the Legacy Protocol. Something I've been working on for years, hoping I'd never need it. It contains a concentrated dose of the remaining spider essence from my blood, along with nanobots programmed to facilitate genetic integration." "That sounds dangerous," Deku said. "It is," Peter admitted. "The transformation would be painful, possibly fatal if your body rejects it. And we have no idea how it would interact with One for All. You could lose both powers, or worse. Or," Miles added, "you could become something entirely new. A fusion of two different heroic legacies." Deku stared at the device, his mind churning. Everything about this was insane. He had responsibilities in Japan, a life he'd built, friends and allies who depended on him. Adding Spider-Man's legacy to that seemed impossible. But then he thought about the children in that bus, about Peter throwing himself toward danger even as his powers failed, about the ideal of heroism that transcended national boundaries. "I need to think about it," Deku said finally. "Of course," Peter said, placing the device back under his pillow. "This isn't a decision to make lightly. But Izuku, time isn't on our side. The goblin is still out there, and he made it clear this was just the beginning. New York is going to need a protector sooner rather than later. I could stay and help as Deku." "For how long?" Miles interrupted gently. "A week? A month? You have your own responsibilities. But if you took on the spider powers, you could operate in both spheres. Deku in Japan, Spider-Man when needed here. The powers would make that possible. Web swinging is a lot faster than commercial flights." It was a tempting thought, Deku had to admit. The ability to protect people on a truly global scale, to be a hero without borders. There's one more thing, Peter said, his voice growing softer. The spider sense. Your danger detection ability? It's more than that. It's a connection to the web of life itself, to the fundamental forces that bind all living things. Every Spider-Man across every dimension has it, this connection to something greater. It's hard to explain, but it's part of what makes Spider-Man special. Not just the powers, but the perspective they provide. Deku thought about his own connection to One for All, to the vestiges of the previous users who guided and supported him. Perhaps this wasn't so different. Can I ask you something? Deku said. Shoot, Peter replied. Do you regret it? Being Spider-Man? Peter was quiet for a long moment, and Miles reached over to squeeze his shoulder in silent support. I regret a lot of things, Peter finally said. People I couldn't save, relationships I destroyed, the normal life I never got to live. But being Spider-Man itself? Never. Not for a second. Every life I saved, every kid who got to grow up because Spider-Man was there, it was worth it. All of it. He looked directly at Deku. But that's why I'm being honest with you about the cost. This isn't just about gaining powers. It's about accepting a responsibility that will define the rest of your life. Every choice you make, every relationship you have, will be affected by it. Deku thought about his own journey, about the moment All Might had offered him One for All. He'd been a quirkless kid with nothing but determination and a desire to help others. Now he was being offered another impossible gift, another overwhelming responsibility. Show me more, he said finally. About the process, the risks, everything. I won't make this decision blindly. Peter smiled, the expression taking years off his face. Friday, bring up the legacy protocol files. Full disclosure. The room's wall screen came to life, displaying detailed technical specifications. For the next 3 hours, Peter and Miles walked Deku through everything, the genetic modifications, the likely pain of transformation, the potential for failure. They discussed the practical aspects too, maintaining a secret identity, balancing two heroic personas, the unique challenges of Spider-Man's rogues gallery. The web shooters are actually the easy part, Peter explained, showing holographic blueprints. The formula for web fluid is chemistry, not powers. I can teach you that. The hard part is learning to think three-dimensionally, to see the city as a series of web points and swing lines. I've had some experience with unconventional movement, Deku said, thinking of his Air Force techniques and float quirk. That'll help, Miles agreed. But there's nothing quite like web swinging. It's freedom and terror all mixed together. As the sun began to set over New York, painting the hospital room in shades of orange and red, alerts sounded. Friday's voice filled the room. Priority news broadcast. The Green Goblin has issued a public challenge. The wall screen switched to a news feed. The Goblin stood atop the Empire State Building, his purple and green armor gleaming in the dying light. People of New York. The villain's voice boomed through speakers. Your Spider-Man is dead. Not literally, I'm not that merciful, but effectively. He's powerless, broken, just another casualty of time and my genius. This city is now under my protection, and my protection comes with a price. Submit, or suffer the consequences. The feed cut to panicking crowds, people fleeing the streets as Goblin gang members emerged from the shadows, emboldened by Spider-Man's absence. Peter's hands clenched into fists for tubes straining. I have to. He tried to get up, only for his body to betray him, sending him falling back against the pillows. Pete, you can't, Miles said firmly. Your body can't handle it. People are in danger, and other heroes will handle it, Miles insisted. The Avengers are dealing with an invasion in Sokovia, Friday interrupted. The Fantastic Four are off-world. Current available heroes in New York are minimal. Deku stood up. I'll go. You don't know this city, Peter protested. Then guide me, Deku said firmly. Friday can relay communications, right? I'll be your hands in the field. Peter and Miles exchanged glances. Finally, Peter nodded. My spare suits are in the workshop, sub-level 3. They won't fit perfectly, but I'll make do, Deku said, already moving toward the door. But Peter, when I get back, I want you to ask me again. Ask you what? Deku paused at the doorway. If I'm ready to carry on the Spider-Man legacy. Because watching you try to get up just now, seeing how much it's killing you to not be out there, I think I'm beginning to understand what you meant about responsibility. He left before Peter could respond, racing through Stark Tower's corridors toward the workshop. Behind him, he heard Miles say quietly, "I think you found the right person, Pete." "Yeah," Peter's voice was soft, thoughtful. "I think maybe I did." The workshop was a testament to decades of heroism. Dozens of Spider-Man suits lined the walls, each representing a different era, a different challenge overcome. Deku chose one of the more recent models, its fabric incorporating both flexibility and armor plating. It was surreal, pulling on the iconic red and blue. The suit adjusted automatically, conforming to his body shape, but it still felt like wearing someone else's skin. The mask's heads-up display activated, showing him tactical data about the city. "Can you hear me?" Peter's voice came through the mask's speakers. "Loud and clear," Deku confirmed. "Good. The Goblin will expect Spider-Man tactics. Don't give him that. Be yourself, just in a different costume." "And Izuku?" "Yes? Be careful. The city, it has a way of testing heroes. Show it what the symbol of peace can do." Deku moved to the workshop's exit, a platform that extended out over the city. Night had fallen properly now, and New York spread out before him like a constellation of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there, the Green Goblin was terrorizing innocent people, believing he'd won. "One for all, full cowling," Deku whispered, green energy crackling through the Spider-Man suit. 45%. He leaped into the night, not web-swinging but bound-leaping, using air force to propel himself between buildings. It wasn't Spider-Man's grace, but it was effective. As he raced toward the Empire State Building, Deku thought about the conversation he just had, about the device hidden under Peter's pillow, about the choice that awaited him when this crisis was over. He thought he'd left impossible decisions behind when he'd mastered One for All. But perhaps that had just been preparation for this moment, for this choice. The Green Goblin wanted to prove that Spider-Man was finished. Deku was about to show him how wrong he was, even if he had to do it as himself wearing someone else's legacy. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to convince himself that he could truly carry that legacy forward. The Stark Tower medical wing existed in a perpetual state of controlled chaos, even during quiet moments. Somewhere in its depths, machines hummed with barely contained energy, monitoring systems tracked vital signs of patients 3 floors away, and automated protocols ran continuous diagnostics on everything from air quality to potential security breaches. It was into this orchestrated symphony of technology that Izuku Midoriya walked, 5 days after the battle in Times Square. He'd spent the previous 2 days helping New York's remaining heroes deal with the Goblins' gang uprising. Without their leader, who had vanished after Deku's intervention, the criminals had been more nuisance than threat, but their actions had highlighted a glaring truth. New York felt Spider-Man's absence like a missing tooth, constantly probing the gap where something vital used to be. Now, standing outside Peter Parker's private room, Deku hesitated. Through the door's small window, he could see Peter sitting up in bed, no longer connected to the maze of tubes and wires that had sustained him during the critical first days. He looked ordinary. That was perhaps the strangest thing. Without the mask, without the powers, Peter Parker looked like any other middle-aged man recovering from trauma. Deku knocked softly. "Come in," Peter called, his voice stronger than it had been during their last conversation. The room had changed since Deku's previous visit. Personal items had appeared, photographs on the bedside table, a worn paperback book, a tablet propped up displaying what looked like scientific equations. Someone, probably Peter's wife, had brought pieces of his life to make the sterile medical space more bearable. "You wanted to see me?" Deku said, closing the door behind him. Peter nodded, gesturing to a chair. "Thanks for coming. And thanks for the help with the Goblin's goons." The news coverage was interesting. "Mystery hero in spider suit saves city" was my personal favorite headline. "I'm sorry if I damaged the suit." "Please," Peter interrupted with a wave of his hand. "That suit's been through worse. Besides, seeing someone else wear it, even temporarily, it helped me realize something." He reached for a remote on his bedside table, and the room's windows immediately darkened, becoming opaque. Deku recognized the privacy measures from their previous conversation, but this time they seemed more elaborate. He could feel a subtle vibration in the air, like standing near a massive subwoofer playing a note too low to hear. Sonic dampening field, Peter explained, noticing Deku's expression. What we're about to discuss can't leave this room. Not yet. Maybe not ever, depending on what you decide. Decide? Peter was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that his earlier joking had masked. Izuku, can I call you Izuku? Of course. Izuku, what do you know about the nature of superpowers? Not quirks, but the other kinds of abilities that exist in the world? It was an unexpected question. Deku found himself shifting into the analytical mode that had served him well throughout his hero career. There are several categories beyond quirks. Mutations like the X-Men, technological enhancements like Iron Man's armor, mystical abilities like Doctor Strange, and then there are the accidents. People who gain powers through exposure to radiation or chemicals or other external factors. I fall into that last category, Peter said. When I was 15, I was bitten by a spider that had been exposed to a unique form of radiation during an experiment at Oscorp. The spider was dying, and in its death throes, it somehow transferred its proportional abilities to me. Strength, speed, agility, the ability to stick to walls, and a precognitive warning system I call spider sense. I've read the public reports, Deku said. Though I imagine they don't tell the full story, Peter smiled grimly. Not even close. The public story is simple, digestible. Radioactive spider bite equals superpowers. But the truth is far more complex and frankly impossible to replicate under normal circumstances. He pulled out a tablet from the bedside drawer, entering a long password before handing it to Deku. The screen displayed a complex molecular structure that seemed to shift and change even as Deku watched. That's a representation of what we call the spider essence, Peter explained. It's not just radiation, not just a mutation. It's something almost alive, a unique interaction between radiation, spider DNA, and human physiology that should have killed me but instead transformed me. For 30 years, some of the brightest minds on the planet have studied my blood, and we still don't fully understand it. Deku studied the data, his mind racing to comprehend the implications. This is incredible. The complexity alone makes it impossible to replicate, Peter finished. Believe me, others have tried. Oscorp spent millions trying to recreate the accident. They got monstrosities, failures, or at best, temporary enhancements that burned out the user's system within weeks. But the Goblin's bomb destroyed my body's ability to maintain the spider essence, Peter said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. The purple energy specifically targeted the unique cellular structures that allowed me to be Spider-Man. It's like, imagine if someone could selectively destroy only the parts of your body that channel one for all, leaving everything else intact but rendering you powerless. The comparison hit home. Deku unconsciously flexed his scarred hand, remembering his own struggles with power that seemed too great for his body to contain. But here's the thing, Peter continued, leaning forward. The spider essence itself, the core template that made Spider-Man possible, it's not entirely gone. It exists in trace amounts in my blood, dormant, unable to express itself in my damaged cells but still present. You're saying it could be transferred? I'm saying I've spent the last 5 years developing a contingency plan for if something like this ever happened. Peter reached under his mattress, pulling out a small metallic case. He opened it to reveal a device that looked like a cross between a medical injector and something from a science fiction movie. It gleamed silver and blue, with a small viewing window showing a faintly glowing green liquid. The Legacy Protocol, Peter said softly. My last invention as Spider-Man. Deku stared at the device, understanding the weight of what he was being shown. You want to pass on your powers. I want Spider-Man to continue, Peter corrected. New York needs its protector. The world needs heroes who understand that the small saves matter just as much as the big ones. And after watching you these past few days, seeing how you've stepped up without hesitation, I believe you're the right person to carry this forward. Peter, Deku paused, his mind spinning. My power, one for all, it's already a combination of multiple quirks passed down through generations. Adding something completely different, something not even quirk-based. We have no idea what could happen. No, we don't, Peter agreed. It could kill you. Your body could reject the spider essence entirely. Or worse, it could create a conflict between your existing powers that destroys both. Then why? Because there's also a chance it could work, Peter interrupted. A chance that your body, already adapted to handling multiple power sources, could integrate the spider essence in a way no normal human could. You could become something new, a bridge between different types of heroic power. A knock at the door interrupted them. Peter quickly closed the case, sliding it back under the mattress, before calling out, "Come in." The door opened to reveal a man in his mid-30s, walking with a slight but noticeable limp. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a Columbia University sweatshirt, but something about the way he moved, the controlled grace despite his injury, marked him as someone who had been more. "Miles," Peter said warmly. "Perfect timing as always." Miles Morales smiled, but Deku could see the concern in his eyes as he looked at Peter. "How are you holding up, old man?" "Oh, you know, contemplating mortality, dealing with an existential crisis, the usual Tuesday afternoon stuff." Peter's joke didn't quite mask the pain underneath. "Miles, this is Izuku Midoriya." "Izuku, Miles Morales, the second Spider-Man," Deku said, standing to shake Miles' hand. "It's an honor to meet you, former Spider-Man," Miles corrected, his voice carrying no bitterness, just acceptance. "These days I'm just a high school physics teacher trying to convince teenagers that understanding velocity is more useful than TikTok." He pulled up a chair, sitting down with careful precision that spoke to ongoing management of his injury. "Peter told me what he's planning," Miles said, cutting straight to the point. "The legacy protocol." "And?" Deku asked. "And I think he's right," Miles said simply. "When I had to retire, when that psycho with the neural disruptor scrambled my nervous system, I thought my life was over. Spider-Man was who I was, you know. But Peter helped me understand something. Spider-Man isn't a person, it's an ideal. It's the promise that someone's watching out for the people everyone else forgets." He leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes distant with memory. "I became Spider-Man when Peter was injured and couldn't continue for almost a year. I was 17, scared out of my mind, with powers I barely understood and a legacy I couldn't possibly live up to. But Peter trained me, guided me, helped me understand that being Spider-Man wasn't about being him. It was about being the best version of myself in service to others. But I'm not from here," Deku pointed out. "I don't know New York, don't understand its rhythms, its people." "Neither did I," Miles interrupted. "I was from Brooklyn, and suddenly I was trying to protect Manhattan too." "You learn. The city teaches you, if you're willing to listen." He paused, then added, "Plus, in some ways, being an outsider might be an advantage." "How so?" Peter took over the explanation. "New York's villains know me. They know my patterns, my weaknesses, the people I care about. They've had 30 years to study Spider-Man, to plan around his abilities. But you're a wild card. Your fighting style, your approach to problems, even your moral framework, it's all different. You could be the fresh start Spider-Man needs." "Show him the full data," Miles suggested. "He deserves to know everything before making a decision." Peter nodded, retrieving the case again and pulling out a second tablet. This one displayed medical data, probability matrices, and what looked like simulation results. "We've run every test we could without actual human trials," Peter explained. "The legacy protocol isn't just an injection, it's a complete transformation process. The device contains concentrated spider essence, but also nanobots programmed to facilitate integration at the cellular level. They would literally rewrite portions of your DNA, creating hybrid cells capable of channeling both One for All and spider powers." Deku studied the data, his analytical mind processing the information. "The success rate, 43%, Peter said quietly. "In simulations. Real-world results could be better or worse. And the 57% failure rate ranges from the powers simply not taking, to complete rejection resulting in death," Peter admitted. "I won't lie to you, Izuku. This is dangerous. Possibly the most dangerous thing you've ever done." "You haven't seen some of the things I've done," Deku said with a weak smile, remembering his early days breaking bones with every use of One for All. "The process itself would be excruciating," Miles added. "Every nerve ending rewriting itself, every muscle fiber adapting to new capabilities." Peter was unconscious when he got his powers. The spider bite knocked him out, and he woke up changed. You'd be awake for every second of it. Deku was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd been told. Outside the dampening field, he could hear the muffled sounds of the city, sirens, traffic, life continuing despite the absence of its most famous protector. Can I ask you both something? He finally said. Shoot, Peter replied. What's the hardest part? Not the fighting, not the villains, but the hardest part of being Spider-Man? Peter and Miles exchanged glances, a whole conversation in that look. The balance, Miles said finally. Every moment you're not in the suit, someone could be getting hurt. Every date, every family dinner, every normal human moment is shadowed by the knowledge that you could be out there saving someone. The loneliness, Peter added. Even when you're surrounded by people who love you, there's a part of you that's always separate, always watching for danger, always ready to run toward what everyone else runs from. It's not that you can't have relationships, but they're always complicated. And the guilt, Miles said softly. The people you can't save. The victories that feel like defeats because someone still got hurt. Spider-Man carries the weight of every failure, even the ones that weren't really failures. But? Deku prompted, sensing there was more. Peter smiled, and for the first time since his injury, it reached his eyes. But when you save someone, really save them, when a kid goes home to their parents because Spider-Man was there, when an innocent person gets to live another day because you stood between them and danger. There's nothing like it. No drug, no high, no other experience comes close to that feeling. It's addictive, Miles agreed. That's why retirement is so hard. It's not just losing the powers, it's losing the purpose. Deku thought about his own experiences, about the weight of one for all, about the countless people he'd saved and the ones he hadn't. He understood what they were describing intimately. Tell me about the transformation process, he said. If I decided to do this, what exactly would happen? Peter pulled up a new screen on the tablet, showing a step-by-step breakdown. First, we need to prepare your body. A series of treatments to ensure your system doesn't immediately reject the spider essence. Think of it as preparing soil before planting something foreign. That would take about a week, Miles added. During that time, you need to maintain your one-for-all usage at minimal levels. No heroics, no major exertion. Then comes the actual transfer, Peter continued. The legacy protocol would be injected directly into your spinal column, where it would begin spreading through your nervous system. The nanobots would guide the integration, but your body would do most of the work. How long? The acute phase? About 6 hours. Full integration? Could be days, could be weeks. Everyone's physiology is different. Deku stood up, walking to the darkened window. Even though he couldn't see through it, he knew the city was out there, wounded and waiting. There's something else, Peter said quietly. The spider sense. It's not just danger detection, it's a connection to something greater. Every Spider-Man across every reality has it, this link to what we call the web of life and destiny. It's hard to explain, but it's part of what makes Spider-Man special. You wouldn't just be gaining my powers, you'd be joining something universal. You make it sound almost mystical. Maybe it is, Miles said. I'm a physics teacher, I believe in science. But some things about being Spider-Man, they transcend simple explanation. Deku turned back to face them. What about the original plan? Surely you had someone in mind before I came along? Peter's expression grew complicated. There was someone. My daughter Annie. She inherited some spider abilities naturally, but... He trailed off. But she made it clear she wanted a normal life, Miles finished. She saw what being Spider-Man cost Peter, what it cost his family. She chose differently, and we respect that. So I'm not the first choice, Deku said, though there was no accusation in his tone. You're the right choice, Peter corrected. Annie would have been the obvious choice, but obvious doesn't mean right. You have something she doesn't. You already understand the weight of inherited power. You know what it means to carry someone else's legacy while making it your own. There was another knock at the door. This time, when it opened, a woman with red hair streaked with silver entered. Mary Jane Watson Parker looked tired but determined, carrying a tray with coffee and sandwiches. I thought you boys might be hungry, she said, setting the tray down. Her green eyes fixed on Deku with an intensity that made him straighten unconsciously. You're the one Peter wants to give his powers to. It wasn't a question. MJ, Peter started. No, she interrupted. If you're going to ask this young man to take on your burden, I get to have my say. She turned to Deku. Do you have anyone? Family, loved ones, people who would be affected by this decision? Deku thought of his mother, of his friends from Yue, of Achiko. Yes. Then you need to understand that you're not just choosing for yourself. Every person who loves you will live with the fear that one day Spider-Man won't come home. They'll watch the news with their hearts in their throats. They'll learn to recognize the different types of sirens, to know which ones mean you're in danger. MJ, Peter said softly. She held up a hand, not finished. But they'll also know pride like nothing else. They'll see the lives you save, the difference you make, and they'll understand that loving someone who puts others first is both the hardest and most rewarding thing in the world. She moved to Peter's bedside, taking his hand. I've been married to Spider-Man for 20 years. I've been afraid for 20 years. But I've also been inspired every single day by the man who refuses to let anyone fall if he can help it. Even now? Deku asked gently. Even with what it cost him, MJ squeezed Peter's hand. Especially now. Because even without his powers, even broken and hurting, his first instinct when he heard about trouble was to try to help. That's not Spider-Man, that's Peter Parker. The powers just gave him the means to act on who he already was. She looked at Deku again. So my question for you isn't whether you can handle the powers. It's whether the people in your life can handle loving Spider-Man. Because that's the real test. The room fell silent. Deku thought about Achiko, about how she'd supported him through every challenge, every setback. He thought about his mother, who'd learned to live with the fear of having the world's #1 hero for a son. They'd already made that choice, hadn't they? There's one more thing, Peter said, breaking the silence. He pulled out his phone, swiping to a video. This came in an hour ago. The screen showed the Green Goblin, standing atop the Brooklyn Bridge. His mask was off, revealing a young face that bore a disturbing resemblance to the Osborn family photos Deku had seen in news archives. People of New York, the Goblin said, his voice carrying over the wind. You've been living in a fantasy, protected by a lie. Spider-Man is dead in every way that matters, and I am the proof that the old heroes have no place in our future. In 48 hours, I will demonstrate the new order, and this time, there will be no last-minute rescue, no amazing escape. The age of the spider is over. The age of the goblin has begun. The video ended. 48 hours, Miles said quietly. He's planning something big, Peter added. And right now, New York has no Spider-Man to stop him. Deku stared at the blank screen, his mind made up. What do I need to do? Peter blinked. You're sure? No, Deku admitted. I'm terrified. This goes against everything I know about powers, about my responsibilities in Japan. But All Might once told me that a hero's job is to run toward danger when everyone else runs away. Right now, New York is in danger, and Spider-Man, the idea of Spider-Man, needs to exist. This isn't just about New York, Miles pointed out. Once you take on these powers, you'll be connected to something bigger. Every Spider-Man in every universe is part of the same web. You'll be joining a legacy that transcends dimensions. I understand, Deku said, though he wasn't sure he truly did. When do we start? Peter and Miles exchanged glances again, and MJ sighed softly. The preparatory treatments can begin immediately, Peter said. But Izuku, once we start, there's no going back. The treatments alone will alter your body chemistry. Even if you decided not to go through with the full transformation, you'd be changed. I need to make a call first, Deku said. To Japan. To explain what I can explain. Use my phone, MJ offered, handing him a secure satellite phone. The encryption is as good as it gets. Deku stepped into the bathroom for privacy, dialing a number he knew by heart. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Deku? Achiko's voice was worried. The news said there was another incident in New York. Are you okay? I'm fine, he assured her. But Achiko, something's happened. Something I need to tell you about. He explained as much as he could without violating Peter's trust, talking about the possibility of gaining new abilities, of taking on a new responsibility. Achiko listened without interrupting, and he could picture her expression, that focused intensity she got when processing important information. This is about Spider-Man, isn't it? She said when he finished. The news says he's gone, but that's not quite true, is it? How did you, Izuku? I've known you for over 15 years. You have that tone in your voice, the same one you had when All Might offered you one for all. You're about to do something heroically stupid and probably dangerous. Despite everything, Deku smiled. Probably. And you need to do this? I think so. No, I know so. New York needs, the world needs, you, Achiko finished. The world needs you, whether you're Deku or something else. She paused. I trust you. And I'll be here when you get back. Just come back, okay? I promise, Deku said, meaning it with everything he had. I love you too. He ended the call and returned to the main room, where the others were waiting. Ready? Peter asked. Deku nodded. What's first? Miles pulled out a medical kit from a cabinet. First, we need baseline readings. Blood samples, neural scans, complete physiological workup. We need to understand exactly how One for All has changed your body before we start adding spider powers to the mix. For the next 3 hours, Deku submitted to test after test. Peter, despite his condition, directed the procedures with the expertise of someone who'd spent decades studying superhuman physiology. Miles handled the hands-on work, drawing blood, attaching sensors, running scans. Your cellular structure is fascinating, Peter said, studying the results on his tablet. One for All has reinforced your body at every level. Your bones are denser than normal, your muscles more efficient, your nervous system capable of handling electrical impulses that would kill a normal person, which might actually help with the integration, Miles added. Your body is already adapted to handling abnormal power levels, or it might make things worse, Peter cautioned. We're in uncharted territory here. As the sun set over New York, casting long shadows through the now transparent windows, Deku stood in the center of the medical room, wearing sensor patches that monitored his every biological function. The first injection, Peter said, as Miles prepared a syringe with a glowing blue liquid. This will begin preparing your body for the spider essence. You might feel some tingling, maybe some mild discomfort. Deku nodded, rolling up his sleeve. Miles administered the injection with practiced precision. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Deku gasped as what felt like liquid lightning spread from the injection site. It wasn't painful exactly, but it was overwhelming, like every nerve in his arm was suddenly hyperaware. Breathe through it, Miles coached. Your body's adjusting. The sensation spread, flowing through Deku's torso, down his other arm, through his legs. He could feel One for All responding, the vestiges stirring in concern at this foreign intrusion. His readings are spiking, Peter said, watching the monitors. Heart rate elevated, neural activity off the charts. I'm okay, Deku managed, though sweat was beading on his forehead. It's just intense. The sensation peaked, then gradually subsided, leaving Deku feeling oddly sensitized, like his skin was picking up air currents he never noticed before. That's stage 1, Peter said. Your body is now primed for the possibility of spider powers. Over the next week, we'll do 6 more treatments, each one pushing your biology a little further toward compatibility. And then, Peter said, retrieving the legacy protocol device from its case, we find out if a spider and a symbol can become one. Miles helped Deku to a chair, handing him a bottle of water. You did well. Most people would have passed out from that level of neural stimulation. One for All trained me to handle pain, Deku said, though his hands were shaking slightly. This is just different. Different how? Peter asked, genuinely curious. Deku thought about it. One for All feels like power flowing through established channels, like a river following its banks. This feels like creating new channels, carving new paths through stone. That's actually a pretty accurate description, Peter said, impressed. The spider powers don't follow normal biological pathways. They create their own. MJ, who had been quiet during the procedure, placed a gentle hand on Deku's shoulder. You're very brave, you know that? Or very foolish, Deku replied. In my experience, she said with a sad smile, looking at Peter, the two often go hand in hand when it comes to heroes. Outside, night had fully fallen over New York. Somewhere out there, the Green Goblin was planning something terrible. The city held its breath, waiting for a salvation that might not come. But in a medical room in Stark Tower, that salvation was taking its first tentative steps toward existence. Izuku Midoriya, the symbol of peace from Japan, was beginning a transformation that would either create a new legend or destroy everything he'd worked to become. 47 hours, Peter said quietly, looking at the clock. We have 47 hours to create a new Spider-Man. Then we'd better get to work, Deku said, standing despite his body's protests. What's next? Miles pulled up a training schedule on his tablet. Next, we start teaching you to think like a spider. The powers are just half of it. The other half is understanding how to use them. And Peter added, we need to start working on your quips. Spider-Man without bad jokes is like, well, it's just wrong. Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the uncertainty, Deku found himself laughing. I'll work on it. That's the spirit, Peter said, but his expression grew serious. Izuku, what you're doing. I want you to know how grateful I am. This isn't just about passing on powers. It's about ensuring that everything Spider-Man represents continues. With great power, Deku began, comes great responsibility. Peter, Miles, and even MJ finished in unison. Deku nodded, understanding settling into his bones alongside the foreign chemicals reshaping his biology. He thought he'd understood responsibility when he inherited one for all. But this was different. This wasn't just about being the strongest or the symbol people looked up to. This was about being the hero who would swing through the night to stop a mugging, who would miss dinner to rescue a cat from a tree, who would carry the weight of every life in the city as a personal responsibility. This was about becoming Spider-Man. And as the first treatment continued its work, rewriting him from the inside out, Izuku Midoriya began to understand that crossing the Pacific had been the easy part. The real journey was just beginning. The abandoned Oscorp facility on the outskirts of Queens looked like a monument to corporate ambition gone wrong. Weeds pushed through cracks in the parking lot, windows were boarded or broken, and a faded sign reading Oscorp Industries. Building Tomorrow Today hung at an angle that suggested tomorrow had come and gone without anyone noticing. Izuku Midoriya stood at the entrance, his body still tingling from the week of preparatory treatments. Each injection had pushed him further from purely human, preparing his cells for a transformation that had no precedent. One for all hummed beneath his skin, the Quirk seemingly curious about the changes happening to its vessel. This is where it happened, Peter Parker said from his wheelchair, Miles pushing him up the cracked concrete ramp. Despite his injuries, Peter had insisted on being present for the transformation. Not this exact building, but one just like it. Oscorp loved their cookie-cutter facilities. Norman Osborn believed in standardization, even in his mad science. Why here? Deku asked, eyeing the dilapidated structure with concern. Stark Tower has better medical facilities. Because this place is isolated, Miles explained, checking a tablet that showed various sensor readings. What we're about to do, if something goes wrong, we need distance from populated areas. Plus, there's a certain poetic justice to creating a new Spider-Man in the ruins of Oscorp. They entered through a service door that Miles had already scouted and secured. Inside, the building was a maze of empty laboratories and abandoned equipment. Their footsteps echoed off bare walls that had once housed cutting-edge research into genetic manipulation and human enhancement. Also, Peter added as they navigated the corridors, this particular facility has something special. Something Norman Osborn built but never got to use. They descended 2 floors underground, the air growing cooler and more sterile. Emergency lighting cast long shadows, making the journey feel like a descent into some technological underworld. Finally, they reached a heavy door marked with biohazard warnings and a keypad that should have been dead after years without power. Peter typed in a code from memory. The door unlocked with a pneumatic hiss. How is this possible? Deku asked. The building's been abandoned for years. Oscorp built their critical systems with independent power sources, Peter explained as they entered. Miniaturized arc reactors, courtesy of some legally questionable acquisition of Stark Tech. Norman was paranoid about losing his research to something as mundane as a power outage. The room beyond the door was unlike anything else in the building. Pristine white walls, gleaming medical equipment, and in the center, a cylindrical chamber that looked like a fusion of an MRI machine and something from science fiction. The evolution chamber, Peter said, a complex mix of emotions in his voice. Norman designed it to facilitate controlled genetic transformation. He never used it on himself. Even he wasn't that crazy, but the theory was sound. It creates a localized field that helps stabilize cellular mutation, while providing real-time monitoring of every biological process. Miles was already moving around the room, powering up systems and checking displays. Everything's functional. It's like this room has been in stasis, waiting. Maybe it has been, Peter said quietly. Norman was many things, but he was also a genius. He knew someone would eventually need this technology. Deku approached the chamber, one for all crackling faintly around him in response to his nervousness. Through the transparent aluminum viewing panel, he could see a medical chair surrounded by articulated arms ending in various instruments. The process, Peter began, wheeling himself to a control console, will take approximately 6 hours. Once we begin, stopping could be fatal. Your body will be in constant flux, trying to reconcile one for all with the spider essence. The chamber will help stabilize the transformation, but ultimately it's up to your will to see it through. I understand, Deku said, though his mouth was dry. Miles pulled out the legacy protocol device, its silver and blue surface gleaming under the medical lights. This contains everything: the concentrated spider essence, the nanobots programmed with transformation protocols, and a few additions Peter and I have made based on our combined experience. Additions? Peter pulled up a holographic display showing DNA strands and cellular structures. We've included genetic markers from both my and Miles' spider transformations. Not enough to dilute the essence, but enough to provide options. Your body will choose which traits to express based on compatibility with One for All. It's evolution in fast forward, Miles added. Instead of millions of years of adaptation, you get 6 hours. Deku began removing his shirt, revealing a torso marked by scars from years of hero work. The preparatory treatments had left faint traces, thin lines of blue-green that followed his major blood vessels, marking where his body had been primed for transformation. Before we begin, Peter said, his tone serious, there's something else you should know. The spider sense isn't just a danger warning. During the transformation, it might connect you to something larger. Other Spider-Men have reported visions, connections across dimensions. Don't be alarmed if you experience something similar. Across dimensions? Deku asked, pausing in his preparations. Every universe has a Spider-Man, Miles said. Or so the theory goes. The web of life and destiny connects them all. During your transformation, when you're between human and spider, you might touch that web. It sounded impossible, but then again, Deku had experienced the vestiges of One for All, had communicated with the spirits of previous users. Perhaps this wasn't so different. He climbed into the chamber, settling into the medical chair. Immediately, restraints emerged, not to imprison, but to prevent involuntary movement during the transformation that could cause injury. These will release if there's an emergency, Miles assured him, attaching monitoring sensors to Deku's temples, chest, and spine. But try not to thrash too much. The chamber's instruments need to maintain precise positioning. Peter rolled his wheelchair to where Deku could see him through the viewing panel. Izuku, what you're about to experience will be unlike anything you've faced before. One for All prepared your body for power, but this will remake you at a fundamental level. Remember, you're not losing who you are. You're becoming more. Any last advice? Deku asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Peter and Miles exchanged glances. Don't fight it, Peter said. When the spider essence enters your system, your instinct will be to resist. One for All might see it as an invasion. You need to make them understand they're on the same side. And, Miles added with a slight smile, try to remember this moment. You're about to become part of something legendary. Miles inserted the legacy protocol device into a port on the chamber. The cylinder began to hum, energy fields activating around Deku. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on an opalescent quality. Beginning transformation sequence, Peter announced, his fingers flying over the control console despite his injuries. Izuku, we're going to start with a localized injection to your spinal column. This will hurt. Before Deku could respond, he felt the prick of a needle at the base of his neck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his world exploded. It wasn't pain, exactly. It was sensation beyond what his nervous system was designed to process. Every nerve ending fired at once, sending cascading signals that his brain couldn't interpret. He was hot and cold, expanding and contracting, dissolving and solidifying all at the same time. Neural activity spiking, he heard Miles say, voice distant and distorted. Cellular reconstruction beginning. Deku could feel it, actually feel his cells changing. It started at the injection site, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. But these ripples rewrote everything they touched. His muscle fibers were unraveling and reweaving themselves, becoming denser, more efficient. His bones were restructuring, maintaining their strength while becoming lighter. One for All reacted violently to the intrusion. Green lightning erupted from Deku's body, contained by the chamber's energy fields but crackling with defensive fury. The quirk had protected him for years, and now it sensed a threat to its host. No, Deku gasped, forcing words through gritted teeth. Not an enemy. Partner. We're partners. He reached for the vestiges, diving deep into the core of One for All where the spirits of previous users resided. The mindscape was in chaos. The usual serene meeting place of consciousness was a storm of green energy and golden spider threads trying to coexist. What is this? The vestige of the first user demanded, his form flickering with alarm. What have you allowed into our sacred space? Evolution, Deku managed, even as his physical body convulsed. One for All was never meant to remain static. It grew with each user, adapted, became more. This is just the next step. This is not a quirk, Nana Shimura's vestige observed, reaching out to touch one of the golden threads. This is something older, more primal. It's possibility, All Might's vestige said, and Deku felt a surge of support from his mentor's spirit. Young Midoriya has always pushed the boundaries of what One for All could be. Perhaps it's time we trusted his judgment. The spider essence wasn't passive during this internal debate. It spread through Deku's body with purpose, seeking integration points with One for All. Where the quirk had reinforced his muscles, the spider essence made them more flexible. Where One for All had strengthened his bones, the spider powers added a peculiar lightness that defied physics. Fascinating, Peter's voice cut through Deku's awareness. The two power sets aren't fighting anymore. They're negotiating. Indeed, Deku could feel it happening. One for All and the spider essence were testing each other, finding common ground. Both were about protection, about using power responsibly. Both demanded sacrifice from their wielder. As Deku meditated on these similarities, the two forces began to synchronize. Hour 2, Miles announced. Cellular integration at 30%. Hour 2? Had it been that long? Time had lost meaning in the transformation chamber. Deku existed in a space between heartbeats, where each second stretched into eternity and hours compressed into moments. The spider sense manifested suddenly, not gradually. One moment Deku's awareness was limited to his own body, the next he could feel everything. The electromagnetic fields of the machinery around him, the heartbeats of Peter and Miles outside the chamber, the vibrations of insects in the walls 3 floors up. It was overwhelming, like suddenly being able to see every color beyond the visible spectrum at once. But there was more. As Peter had warned, the spider sense reached beyond the physical world. Deku felt a vast web stretching through dimensions, each strand a different Spider-Man in a different reality. He saw flashes of them, a Spider-Man in more black and white, one in gleaming armor, another who was more spider than man. For a terrifying, exhilarating moment, he felt their collective consciousness acknowledge him. "Welcome, brother," 1,000 voices seemed to say in unison. "Welcome to the web." Then the vision shattered as his body entered the next phase of transformation. Spinnerets forming, Peter noted with clinical detachment, though Deku could hear the excitement in his voice. But they're different from mine. They're integrating with his existing quirk structure. Deku felt it happening, organic web shooters growing from his wrists, but not in the way Peter had described his own. These were channeling points, similar to the Air Force gauntlets he used for One for All. The spinnerets weren't just producing webbing, they were creating a focusing system for his quirk energy. "Try to activate One for All," Peter instructed. Just a small amount. Deku did, calling on 5% of his power. The result was immediate and dramatic. Green energy flowed through the new spinnerets, and when he instinctively made the web shooting gesture, a strand of energy-infused webbing shot out, glowing with the characteristic green lightning of One for All. "Incredible," Miles breathed. "The webbing is carrying quirk energy. It's not just adhesive, it's a conductor for One for All." The transformation continued, each hour bringing new changes. His spider sense integrated with his danger sense quirk, creating a precognitive awareness that bordered on prescience. He could feel threats not just in the present but echoes of probable futures, paths of danger spreading out like fractal patterns. His wall-crawling ability manifested differently too. Instead of the microscopic hairs Peter had described, Deku's whole body became capable of molecular adhesion when channeling One for All. He could stick to surfaces not just with his hands and feet, but with any part of his body that had quirk energy flowing through it. Hour 4, Miles announced. We're entering the critical phase. This is where the transformation either stabilizes or... He didn't need to finish. Deku could feel it, his body reaching the limit of how much change it could handle. The human genome wasn't meant to be rewritten this extensively, even with One for All's reinforcement. His vitals are all over the place, Peter said, genuine concern in his voice. Heart rate spiking, neural activity approaching dangerous levels. Izuku, you need to stabilize. Find your center. But Deku was lost in the transformation, his consciousness scattered across the changing landscape of his own biology. He was aware of his muscle fibers developing a hybrid structure that combined the explosive power of One for All with the proportional strength of a spider. His skeleton was restructuring, maintaining human appearance while developing an internal architecture that could handle forces that would shatter normal bones. It was too much. He was losing himself in the change, his identity dissolving into the chaos of evolution. Then he heard it, a voice cutting through the biological storm. Izuku. It was all might, not the vestige but a memory, clear and strong. Remember who you are. Not the powers, not the legacy, but who you are at your core. Deku grasped onto that voice like a lifeline. He was Izuku Midoriya. The boy who wanted to save everyone. The hero who believed that anyone could be saved if you just reached out far enough. The symbol of peace who carried the hopes of millions. And now, he was becoming something more. Not replacing what he was, but adding to it. I am here, he whispered, All Might's catchphrase grounding him. Then, with growing strength, I am here. The chaos in his body suddenly snapped into focus. One for All and the spider essence stopped fighting for dominance, and began truly merging. It wasn't a hostile takeover or reluctant coexistence. It was synthesis. My God, Peter said, watching the readouts. His cellular structure is stabilizing, but the configuration. I've never seen anything like it. Deku's eyes snapped open, and they were changed. Still green, but with flecks of gold that seemed to shift and move. He could see everything, ultraviolet patterns on the walls, infrared heat signatures, the electromagnetic spectrum in all its glory. But more than that, he could see the flow of energy through all things, the connections that bound the world together. Final hour, Miles announced unnecessarily. Deku was acutely aware of time now, could feel each second passing through his enhanced perception. The last changes were subtle but profound. His brain was rewiring itself, creating new neural pathways to handle the sensory input from his spider sense. His reflexes, already superhuman from One for All, reached a new level where thought and action became one. His healing factor, a minor aspect of One for All, was dramatically enhanced by the spider essence's regenerative properties. But perhaps the most significant change was something neither Peter nor Miles could measure on their instruments. The vestiges of One for All had accepted the spider essence not as an intruder but as a new vestige, a living power that would be passed on with One for All if Deku ever chose a successor. Spider-Man had become part of One for All's legacy. Transformation complete, Peter announced as the chamber's energy fields powered down. Vitals are, actually, they're perfect. Better than perfect. His body has achieved a level of enhancement I didn't think was possible. The restraints released, and Deku sat up slowly, marveling at how different everything felt. Every movement was perfectly controlled, every sensation crystal clear. He raised his hand, and without thinking about it, shot a web at the ceiling. The strand was unlike anything Peter had produced. It glowed with soft green light and seemed to pulse with power. How do you feel? Miles asked, helping Deku out of the chamber. Different, Deku said, then paused, surprised by his own voice. It was still his, but there was a subtle harmonic to it, as if the vibrations were perfectly tuned. Everything is more clear, more connected, more alive. He took a step and nearly launched himself into the ceiling, his new strength catching him off guard. Peter laughed, a sound full of joy despite his own condition. Yeah, that takes some getting used to. Your proportional spider strength is amplified by one for all. You're probably the strongest Spider-Man who's ever existed. Spider-Man, Deku repeated, testing the title. It felt strange but right, like putting on a perfectly tailored suit. We need to test your abilities, Miles said, ever practical. Make sure everything integrated properly. They spent the next 2 hours in the facility's abandoned testing area, a massive room that had once been used for weapons testing. Deku's new abilities were remarkable. His organic web shooters could produce different types of webbing by channeling different percentages of one for all. At 5%, the webs were strong but flexible. At 20%, they became nearly unbreakable and could conduct electricity. At 45%, they actually became solid constructs of energy that could support tremendous weight. His wall crawling worked through his costume, one for all's energy field extending the molecular adhesion. He could run up walls at full speed, stick with just a finger, or even use the ability offensively, adhering enemies to surfaces by touch. The spider sense had fully integrated with danger sense, creating what Peter called precognitive plus. Deku could not only sense danger but predict the exact sequence of events leading to it, allowing him to prevent threats before they fully materialized. His strength was off the charts. A casual punch at 10% one for all shattered a concrete wall. At 50%, he left a crater in the reinforced floor. Peter and Miles quickly decided to cap strength testing before he brought the building down. But it was his movement that was most impressive. The combination of spider agility and one for all speed created a fighting style that was utterly unique. He could change direction midair without using air force, his body naturally adjusting to impossible angles. He could leap the length of a city block, swing from his webs with perfect precision, and dodge attacks that should have been unavoidable. You're not just Spider-Man, Peter said in awe. You're Spider-Man evolved. The next generation. As they prepared to leave the facility, Deku noticed something, a presence at the edge of his spider sense. Someone was watching them, had been watching for the past hour. We have company, he said quietly, his body tensing. Peter and Miles immediately went on alert. Where? Miles asked. Roof of the building across the street. They're strange. My spider sense can't quite get a read on them. They're dangerous but not immediately threatening. Could be goblin, Peter suggested. Deku shook his head. No, this is different. Older. More patient. He moved to a broken window, peering out into the night. His enhanced vision pierced the darkness, and he saw a figure standing perfectly still on the opposite roof. They wore a long coat that billowed in the wind, and their face was obscured by shadows. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. The figure tilted their head, as if acknowledging Deku's detection, then stepped backward and vanished into the darkness. They're gone, Deku reported, but his spider sense continued tingling. Whoever that was, they'd be back. We should go, Miles said. The goblin's deadline is in 18 hours. We need to prepare. As they left the Oscorp facility, Peter looked back at the building one last time. You know, there's something poetic about this. Oscorp created the spider that made me Spider-Man. Now, in Oscorp's ruins, we've created the next evolution. Deku flexed his hands, feeling the power flowing through them, one for all and spider essence in perfect harmony. What am I now? Deku? Spider-Man? Something else? You're both and neither, Peter said. You're something new. A bridge between different types of heroes, different worlds. You're proof that power isn't about where it comes from but how it's used. They loaded Peter's wheelchair into Miles' van. The vehicle modified with stolen Oscorp tech to mask their signatures from surveillance. As they drove back toward Manhattan, Deku tested his web shooters again, marveling at the green energy flowing through them. There's one more thing, Peter said from the back seat. The costume. I can't wear yours, Deku said immediately. That's Spider-Man's costume. I need something that represents both sides of what I am now. Already thought of that, Miles said, pulling a tablet from the dashboard. I've been working on designs while you were transforming. Take a look. The design was perfect. It maintained the classic Spider-Man silhouette but incorporated elements of Deku's hero costume. The base was still red and blue, but with green accents that followed the web patterns. The spider emblem on the chest was stylized to incorporate elements of Deku's mask design. The eyes were larger, more expressive, with the ability to shift between white and green depending on which power set he was primarily using. The fabric is a carbon nanotube we've Tony Stark developed, Peter explained. It'll respond to your quirk energy, reinforce itself when you use one for all, and it's practically indestructible. Well, as indestructible as anything is when you're fighting supervillains. When did you have time to make this? Deku asked. Peter and Miles exchanged guilty looks. We might have been more confident about the transformation's success than we let on, Miles admitted. As they crossed the bridge into Manhattan, Deku felt the city calling to him in a way it never had before. His spider sense spread out like a web, touching the lives of 8 million people. He could feel their hopes, their fears, their need for someone to watch over them. The goblin won't know what hit him, Peter said with satisfaction. But Deku was thinking about the figure on the roof, the patient watcher who'd observed his transformation. There were more pieces in play than just the goblin. His evolution had been noticed by someone or something that existed in the shadows. Peter, he said carefully, in all your years as Spider-Man, did you ever encounter someone who could hide from your spider sense? Not completely, but like they were shifted slightly out of phase? Peter was quiet for a long moment. Once. Just once. But that's impossible. He's been dead for years. Who, Morlin? A being that hunted spider totems across dimensions. But I killed him. I'm sure of it. Deku filed that information away, his enhanced mind already running probability calculations. The transformation had given him more than just physical powers. His capacity for analysis had exponentially increased. We'll deal with that if it comes up, he decided. Right now, we have a goblin to stop. As they pulled into Stark Tower's underground garage, Deku felt a strange sense of completion. He'd entered the Oscorp facility as Izuku Midoriya, the symbol of peace from Japan. He was leaving as something unprecedented, a fusion of legacies that should have been incompatible. You know what you need now? Miles said as they helped Peter out of the van. What? A name. You can't just be Deku or Spider-Man. You're something new. Deku thought about it as they rode the elevator up to the medical floor. He was still the symbol of peace, still the ninth holder of One for All. But he was also the heir to Spider-Man's legacy, the newest member of a multiversal brotherhood of wall-crawlers. The spider symbol, he said finally. Or maybe. Deku Spider? Peter laughed. We'll work on it. God knows I went through enough names before settling on Spider-Man. The human spider was a particularly bad phase. As the elevator doors opened, revealing MJ waiting with a concerned expression, Deku felt the weight of his new dual identity settling on his shoulders. In less than 18 hours, he would face his first true test as this new hybrid hero. But first, he had to explain to MJ why her husband looked happier than he had since losing his powers. It worked? She asked, though the answer was obvious from Peter's expression. It worked, Peter confirmed. May I present the amazing, spectacular, sensational? Well, we're still working on the name, but you get the idea. MJ studied Deku with those sharp green eyes, taking in the subtle changes. The way he stood with perfect balance, the slight luminescence in his eyes, the way his fingers occasionally twitched as if shooting webs. You look different, she said finally. More complete somehow. I feel complete, Deku admitted. Like two halves of something finally coming together. Good, MJ said firmly. Because from what I've been seeing on the news, you're going to need every advantage you can get. The goblin's been busy while you were evolving. She led them to a monitor showing various news feeds. The goblin had been recruiting, gathering every small-time villain and ambitious criminal in the city. His army was growing, and his deadline was approaching. Deku watched the footage, his enhanced vision catching details others might miss. The goblin's body language suggesting injury, hidden weapons among the crowd, strategic positions being prepared. He's planning something bigger than just taking over the city, Deku said. This is a statement. He wants to prove that the age of traditional heroes is over. Then we prove him wrong, Peter said simply. Deku nodded, green energy crackling around his hands as organic webbing began to form. The evolution was complete. Now it was time to show the world what the next generation of Spider-Man could do. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the image of that figure on the roof, watching, waiting. Whatever was coming, The goblin was just the beginning. The spider sense tingled, not with immediate danger but with the promise of challenges to come. Deku welcomed it. He was no longer just the symbol of peace or Spider-Man's successor. He was evolution itself, and evolution never stopped.